Welcome, first of all. We are live. It's our first live launch event, and we're at Granty's Coffee House in Manchester. And it's fantastic to have so many people joining us, both here in person, ready for the grub afterwards, and a chat with John, and also online. In the room, we can see everybody, including those of you who are on Zoom. So do feel free to interact, wave, smile. If you want to write any comments or questions for later on in the session, please do put them in the chat, and our trusty volunteer, Joe, is nervously manning the Zoom connection. We're relying on somebody else's internet, so if anything goes wrong, which it may well do, we'll try our best to bring it back, but we've got a backup solution in terms of a recording that we'll put online if all goes wrong. Today, we're going to take you inside the process of making the Seal Woman. It's sort of under the bonnet look at what Retrospect Opera does. And of course, today is the launch date for the Seal Woman. And many of you I know will already have received from Valerie in the post your copies. If you are yet to buy one, I'm sure we'll mention that that's a possibility today very easily. Joined, of course, by Valerie Langfield, who is a founding trustee of Retrospect Opera and also, of course, a wonderful musicologist. Next to me is Dr. Andrew King. He is also a founding trustee of Retrospect Opera. A Bantock scholar, I think it's fair to call you. The only Bantock scholar, but I shall correct myself. And also the originator of this project. We'll be joined a little bit later by John Andrews. He, of course, is an internationally renowned conductor, particularly regarded for recording rediscovered works, for which he has won multiple awards, and everybody on this sofa has got their fingers crossed, I think it's not unfair to say, for the success of the Seal Woman. Certainly having heard it, I think it's really very special indeed. Now we're going to slightly change the order of proceedings. The plan originally was to talk about the Seal Woman first, and then to move on to talk about Retrospect Opera's next projects. I think it's probably, given that John reassures me he'll be here in 7 minutes, that's probably long enough for us to do the other projects. Do you think, Valerie?
I think that's a good idea.
Lovely. So let's start there then. So a little snippet about what we're going to do next. So we've actually got not one but 2 operas in the pipeline at the moment. There's a plan afoot to record Ethel Smythe's final opera, Entente Cordiale, in May 2026. Our plan is to record that in time for the centenary of its professional premiere, which was on the 26th of October 1926. We're going to record it with piano accompaniment, since despite many, many emails, visits to libraries and archives, we can't find the orchestral performing materials. Most of them are missing, apart from the famous Intermezzo, one of her most loved works, which features between the 2 halves of this one-act opera. Entente Cordiale was Smythe's attempt at becoming GNS, or becoming as famous as GNS. The work itself is hilarious. It's a one-act post-World War I comedy where a British soldier sent out to buy food for his regiment, with his terrible language skills, he ends up accidentally married to the market stallholder whilst he's trying to simply buy a chicken from her. It's sort of a British opera equivalent of a lower low, is how I'm going to put it. And Simon Buttress, who will direct the singers in the recording, described it as showing Ethel's funny chirps. She called it herself a new departure into comic opera, stated that it was her attempt, as I've said, to take forward Gilbert and Sullivan's work. The Daily Telegraph said, "It amused us as we were intended to be amused." And I think that seems like quite a good recommendation from the Daily Telegraph in the 1920s, I suspect. And of course, it features that Intermezzo, which was chosen out of all of Ethel Smythe's works to mark her centenary at the 1958 prom. I have spent a year creating what I'm calling a definitive recording edition, using Ethel Smythe's published vocal score, the published libretto, and there's a wonderful thing in the Beecham collection, which is her hand-annotated amendments between the student premiere, which was at the Royal College of Music, and the later professional premiere, a year later, actually conducted by Smythe herself. Those of you who are in the room, on your seats, you've got a copy of what is the first number, so you can laugh along to some of Ethel Smythe's funny chops when we are not hilarious enough this afternoon. This recording will join the Boatswain's Mate. It pairs with the Boatswain's Mate nicely, and it will be the fourth Smythe opera in our catalogue, which also, of course, has Fetgerland, the records. So that is our first additional project for this afternoon. And I'm very pleased to say that John has managed to run, by all accounts, given the timing, from Manchester Piccadilly Station. It's a joy to welcome John Andrews. I've given you a glowing introduction already, John. So John is renowned for recording and rediscovered works, all of which do wonderfully well and really showcase composers that have either, for one reason or another, have been overlooked. We're going to start, John, if you don't mind, with a conversation between you and Andy about how the opera came to be. So I think, Andy, you can probably start us off.
I think Andy has to start.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, I was doing my PhD on Granville Bantock at the University of Birmingham. Originally, I had considered doing this thesis on his dramatic works, on his operas, but in the course of the early days of my research, I discovered that there wasn't actually a lot, and certainly not enough material for a whole thesis. So I switched to his songs, of which there are about 417,000, and it was impossible to discuss them all in one thesis. But I sustained an interest in his dramatic works, including The Seal Woman being the only complete opera project that he ever actually realised in his adulthood. There's a youthful piece, but it's not very good. It's mostly sort of third-rate Wagner and Mendelssohn. But this project was much more unique and much more interesting. And I thought, well, I'd like to create a new edition. I'd like to prepare a new score. So I got in touch with Brucey and Hawkes, in whose catalogue the work was, and they said, well, no can do. We've got the parts, but the full score is lost. So I thought, well, send me the parts, and there's a published vocal score. I'll recreate a new full score, as you can see on the table, if you can see on the table, from those. But then some years later, fast forward to about 2015, and I got a job working at Brucey and Hawkes that coincided with a movement of premises of the archive. So all the staff were up at the archive at one point or another, looking through boxes for things that either needed to be sold or sent to a new archive in Croydon. One day I was in there, and it's complete fluke that I happened to be in the room at the time, but one of my colleagues took the lid off a box, and there was the manuscript of The Seal Woman, including well, not many, but 2 or 3 other interesting scores by Somerville, Hamilton Harty, I think. But obviously, my keen interest was, oh look, now there is a full score of The Seal Woman. But by that time, my PhD thesis subject had changed, so my enthusiasm to sit in front of music typesetting software for many, many hours was abated by the fact that I had a thesis on a completely different subject to write. But then, being a founder member of Retrospect Opera and working on neglected British operas, the subject of The Seal Woman did come up. So there was new motivation. We struck a deal with Brucey and Hawkes that if we prepared a new performing edition, because the work, curiously, despite the fact that Bantock in general is copyright, there are certain rules and certain restrictions on specific works, of which The Seal Woman is one. So for a while, yet for a few more years, The Seal Woman actually still is in copyright with Brucey and Hawkes. But nonetheless, we said, well, we'll prepare a new edition if you waive the higher fee. And it was agreed, and there it is on the table.
Marvellous it is too. What was involved then in preparing that performance edition?
Ultimately, meticulously going. The first stage is the typesetting, getting the dots from the manuscript into Sibelius, which is the software we use. Once that stage is done, then you go back and you start looking at every bar and every note, because it is a document in the hand of the composer. In the case of the second act, clearly somebody else, possibly Marjorie Kennedy Fraser, but the 2 hands are not the same. But these people are human and they make mistakes in their own work. So you go through the surviving orchestral parts, which we have from 1924, handwritten parts that were once played from. And then you go, oh look, Act 2, Song 3, Bar 4. there's an A flat here, but an A natural in the parts. And it's then making that decision or making a note to any future performers that there's a discrepancy here, or if something is a clear error, you can correct these things silently, or you may make a note, but more often than not, you would make a note and give the performers the opportunity to decide themselves. Oh, I think that chord sounds better with an A flat, actually, or I think that no, it clearly means an A natural, or actually it should be a C, or because there's then the vocal score, which was published, comes into play, and then there, of course, there are proofs involved and several people checking that everything is correct. So ultimately, in preparing an edition, it's the going through many sources, as not forgetting the libretto as well. There may be differences in the underlay in the score than one might have found in the published, well, not published, but typeset libretto. It's a massive jigsaw puzzle. But it's quite fun.
Rewarding in the end.
Yes, it's rewarding in the end, because there it is now on disc.
Beautiful picture it makes too. John, then you received this score. I guess one of the things I wanted to ask you is what your first thoughts were when.
I mean, in answer to your original question, I should say that I joined this story about halfway through, because I got in touch with Museum Hawks, I think in those intervening years between Andy having discovered it, set to work on it. So I'd been in touch with them saying, could I have a look at this? We just recorded the Arm Judgment of Paris. I was looking around at other interesting works, and they said, "Oh, no, we've got the score, but it's too delicate. We can't photograph it.
It can't be trusted.
Can't be trusted. You can't be trusted." And so that was the first bit of that journey for me, and then, well, probably slightly naughtily, because he put Andy and I in touch with one another, and we were able to then take it forward in the way he described. So I saw it. I didn't see it in beautiful typeset form until most of that work was done. I'd obviously seen the vocal score. That was the revelatory bit, because the orchestration is so delicate, so inventive, despite the fairly small orchestra that he was able to have at his disposal in that tiny pit of Birmingham, that it became immediately apparent that there was an enormous range of colour and a really fascinating sound.
And it's interesting, I've asked you this question before, I think, is how the sort of the magic of the story is conveyed orchestrally in just those few instruments. I think one of the things that's interesting is that, as you say, Bantock's musical style, sort of post-Wagnerian, post-Straussian world, doesn't seem an immediate bedfellow to these very light Marjorie Kennedy Fraser collected Hebridean folk songs. I guess I wonder, in the process of doing it, when did you know that the marriage between the two was going to work musically, and well, did it work musically?
Quite late on. It was the thing that was of biggest concern to me preparing it, was whether that marrying of two very different musical worlds was going to come off dramatically, because, as you say, they're styles that shouldn't work together. The very, very disciplined recreation of folk melodies with only the simplest of it of accompaniments, very faithfully straightforward harmonic language, with, as you say, a very, very rich chromatic post-Wagnerian style, it shouldn't work. I think he achieves it in two ways. Firstly, all of the folk music tends to be diegetic in the story. It is always somebody singing a folk song, and so you accept it dramatically. But then he uses just enough of that material in a leitmotivic fashion in the bits that he composed. The threads are just finely wrought enough through the texture that you're always psychologically reminded of where that melody has come, where it's going to come, how it figures in the mind of the character. Because I think that's always going on in this story. These melodies are not just melodies. They are representing something really deep in the characters, whether it's a rootedness in a place or in that sense of nostalgia. It's always doing something. So the fact that he weaves that together is a kind of magical process. I'm not sure I yet understand how he did it, but I was completely convinced.
It's interesting, isn't it? And I think one of the things we talked about in the recording process, there was a collective sigh of relief about 20 minutes in, I think, because this actually works, and it will work, both in terms of the austerity of the scoring, sort of very transparency, I suppose, of the actual orchestration itself in terms of just being those 16 players. I guess I wonder if it might bring it back one step, though, to how did the collaboration work? So Marjorie Kennedy Fraser, my understanding is that she was one of the first ethnomusicologists in some sense, that she was very, you've in fact just written an article for Classical Music magazine, which touches very much her role. And actually one of the things that I don't even know whether you know it, we've actually just had an email from the Edinburgh archive. They've got 544 songs that are just this week being digitised, and they're in the process of making those available to the public. So on the graphophone that she was carrying around, she was recording, and she paid for nearly 250 wax cylinders, a huge expense, personal expense at the time. And they survived. So they sit in the University of Edinburgh archive. So your article is very precious to that fact. So I'm sorry, I'm giving you the chance to tell us what's in that article.
Well, people can go and read it because Classical Music have very, very kindly left it outside the paywall. But in brief, it was just touching on how she sits within that broader movement of composers going out and trying to find what they believed was authentic musical material representative of societies that were perhaps going to be lost, of rural communities who were falling prey to industrialization, to globalization, and that concern that music that had been part of their lives, possibly for hundreds, thousands of years, was going to be swallowed up. And the tension that she clearly felt, because it's there in the introduction to her published works, that it had to be preserved, but her only means of preserving it for a general public was to write it down on a 5-line stave and to give it bar lines and to give it a key signature, and the implication that equal temperament would be used. And she knew that was compromising it. I think if she'd foreseen the wax cylinder's survival, she would have slept much more easily.
Yeah, and actually availability, because now they're going to be put on a website where we can just listen to all 544, I understand. Yeah. An amazing thing, but you literally have to be in the presence of the single wax cylinder in order to hear these things. So this seems like you're framing it as an attempt to sort of save.
Well, I think she thought
posterity,
and I think she would have been very, very pleased. I think she would be retrospectively incredibly happy that existed. But that in a way, hard work proved not to have been as necessary as she thought.
Really nice, and although it took 100 years, which is really nice. So I'm pleased that we were able to swoop in, I suppose. I guess, Andy, I'm kind of interested. I read your essay in the liner notes, so with great interest, and I wonder if you might take on the journey of how Bantok came into this story. How is the work structured? Is it lots of Marjorie Kennedy Fraser's songs, or does Gravel Bantok take them and work them? Do you have a sense of?
Yes, absolutely. Ultimately, they had a story in mind. Originally, they had a project they were working on, and their aim was to focus on the folk drama, the stories themselves. And Bantok, being a very dramatic man and whose attention was sort of levelled against extraordinarily large projects, which is extraordinary in a man whose attention span was really very small. He would hop from project to project to project, would often have many projects going on at the same time. But because he was a salaried professor, not relying on commissions, he could do that. He could go wherever his fancy took him. So when he covered the first publication of Marjorie Kennedy Fraser's first volume of songs, and he found one he liked that he wanted to turn into.
Oh, in fact, has the need?
Yes. They struck up a friendship and found mutual interests in this Hebridean musical landscape, decided that they would work on a project together. And it was in the initial process that Bantok said, actually, I think this needs music. And I think it needs to be bigger. Let's turn it into an opera. So they then alighted on the story of the Seal Woman, and then quite cleverly found ways, I think, in which to expand the story to an opera-length production and work the material in. Now, I think I'm quite fair in my essay, in which I say often it works very, very well. Occasionally, just in the interest of balance, they clearly found a song they liked and literally shoehorned it in. I mean, one of the absolute best numbers in it, I think, is the Water Kelpie's Lullaby. But there is no need for it to be there. It does not advance the story one little bit, but it's beautiful. So just and I'm all in favour of that, just enjoying things for being beautiful for the sake of it. So really, it was about what can we do with these songs? How can we work them into the story in a way that is ultimately sympathetic, so that it's a coherent piece of theatre, but also making it very beautiful. And Bantock, writing to Kennedy Fraser, says, not in quite such corporate terminology as I'm about to use, but we have a lot of stakeholders to please. We've got the audience, we've got the critics, we've got the singers, we've got the backers, essentially. So it's got to work on all fronts. And Bantock's, one of his concerns was he had to persuade Marjorie Kennedy Fraser that he could not literally just orchestrate her accompaniments. He had to do something a little bit more, because there will be some people in the audience that might think, well, that's just an orchestration of a piano part, and it's not very interesting. And Bantock's great gift, more so at the time, considered more so than Elgar, he was the British orchestrator. He was the person who was considered an extraordinary orchestrator. Elgar thought so, Vaughan Williams thought so. Vaughan Williams thought, if there's anything you need to know about orchestration, look at Bantock. It's an extraordinary story. I think it was Vaughan Williams who wrote to, well, he wrote to Elgar, but he was answered by Elgar's wife, Alice, looking for lessons. They said, oh, well, Edward's far too busy. Try Bantock in Birmingham. Bantock, Vaughan Williams was a bit rude, he didn't. But, Bantock was an extraordinary man. He was very eccentric. He was quite fond of ladies that weren't his wife. And he had extraordinary tastes. I mean, his enthusiasms, one week it could be pickled onions, and it could be because he'd seen somebody in a railway carriage eating them and just taken his fancy. And the next thing you know, there'd be 40 boxes of pickled onions turning up in his house, and his wife would be in despair. It is amazing, really, that he managed to focus so hard and work on this opera with Kennedy Fraser.
It sounds like a fantastic collaboration in some sense, that they both brought something very different. A very different idiom. You've talked a lot about the theatre of the piece, but we actually haven't spoken about the story at all. So I wondered if between you we might try and work out the story of the opera itself.
It's a bit of an enigma, and I'm not entirely sure that any single person entirely understands, because in the flow of their drama, they do get carried away. As I said before, they find pieces that they just wanted to get in there. Ultimately, it is the story of the Selkie myth. And the Selkies think Little Mermaid. Basically, it's a seal, in this case, rather than a mermaid, who is capable of becoming a woman by donning or removing the seal's skin. Now, in this case, the actual seals were once human people, but they were cursed by a wicked stepmother, cast into the sea as sons. But once every 7 years, they return to the land briefly, they remove their sealskin, they dance around a bit, it's all very jolly, and then the intention is that they reclothe themselves in their sealskin and go back to the ocean for the next 7 years. However, on one particular occasion, an Islesman, who's essentially looking after the island and is a fisherman as well, catches sight of these two dancing girls, spots the sealskins, realises what they are, steals one of them, and only when confronted returns one, that is the seal sister. But the seal woman, he's like, no, you're very beautiful, you're mine now. It's totally misogynistic. Weirdly, she just goes with it. She's like, yeah, why not? I'll do it. So
The magic of opera.
the magic of opera, yes, absolutely. They get married, have a child. 7 years later, when there's that weird call in the air, Morag finds the sealskin, shows it to Mother, and Mother, who can't resist, just leaves them and returns to the sea. It's a natural call. Despite having once been a human, the sea is now her natural habitat. And all of this is told through the vision of an old crone who we're supposed to believe is the personage of Mary MacLeod, who was herself a folk song collector and singer and creator who actually existed. So it's kind of it's shrouded in a bit of biography, I suppose, of a real person. But this old crone character is very interesting because she's kind of in on it. She knows that the woman who has married the Islesman is really this seal creature, this selkie person. And they talk about it, they discuss it, you know, she says, I know your secret, and the seal says, I know you know my secret. But then she's also kind of out of it, because at certain times she's saying, oh my God, I can hear these weird people, where are they? Get away from me. But then it is slightly convoluted. But you know, Puccini never wrote anything straightforward, so there.
John, we have an amazing cast of singers. That old crone, I dare say, all of that. So they kind of, was Yvonne Howard. She was joined by equally world-class mezzo Catherine Carvey in the title role. They were supported by emerging artists, Catriona Hewitson as the Seal sister, tenor James Begg, and baritone Albert Bruce. So hi guys, and also a cast involving students, Christian Lois Hu, Fisher and Walter Kelpie, Eve Pearson Maxwell, Caitlin Mackenzie, and Amy Carenza, so the three Swan Maidens. I guess I'm interested, how does that work when you've got world famous artists leading a cast, right the way down to students learning? It must be really exciting to put that group of people together, and I guess I'm opening to both. I know, yes. I guess so. So Andy gave you that lovely dish of wonderful singers to work with.
Yeah.
How does it work in practice?
Well, in practice it works wonderfully easily, because we're talking about myths, but contrary to very unhelpful and deep-seated myths, singers are really easy, nice people. They're very, very normal. They're great to work with. They're all hardworking. They come prepared and ready to make wonderful music. So it was delightful. And I think they also all came with a really intelligent reading of what was going on, in as far as we can unpick it. As Andy said, we've got these, you know, the piece is full of layers. Or are we seeing the real? Are we seeing the real drama? Are we seeing the Kylax memory of it? Are we seeing an unreliable memory of it? So there's all these levels of wondering exactly how real what is being related to us is. And I think that also feeds really wonderfully into the musical style and that nostalgia. Are you seeing something that is a memory? Are you seeing something that is a myth? Are you seeing something that is a reflection of something deeper and older? And all of the singers had come with a really beautifully honed sense of what was going to be needed in each of those scenes. Because in a recording you don't have 4 weeks to workshop it. You can't.
I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously, there's things that people may or may not know is we don't record in order often. So actually, you don't even see the opera from beginning to the end. I guess I'm interested both what that's like from your point of view of holding all of that together, but also what it was like sitting down with the recording and listening from the beginning to the end. Did it then feel like a coherent whole?
It did, and it's one of the nice things about recordings that there's that gap of 7 or 8 months between doing it and being finally able to listen to it all the way through, edited, mastered, that you can come at it completely fresh. Because when you're in it, there's so much to think about. And the danger of being too deep amidst the thickets that you can't see the big picture is really, really apparent. And you know that as well as I do. You when you're in the going down to, is that a quaver or a semi-quaver? Is that a treble andover? Is that a sforzano? You can.
Is it really an E flat?
Is it really? Still agonising about some of those even now. But there is so much of that to be thinking about in the midst of the recording that then it's a very privileged position to be able to then sit back months later and all of that has ideally washed away and you can listen to it and fingers crossed you've got the sweep of the piece.
I mean, absolutely, definitely the case from my perspective. And I guess the same question to you, Andy, really. It's been on your desk for a long time, much longer than ours. What is it like to finally listen to the piece from beginning to end?
It's extraordinary. I mean, I first approached Boozy and Hawks in 2013, so it's been 12 years on my desk. the way it worked has just been, I mean, it's been a long and at certain times very stressful project because, of course, as anybody knows anything about Retrospect Opera, we're all volunteers. So everything we do for Retrospect Opera is on top of how we earn our crust, which in all of us is we're all very busy people. So to actually have the product in my hand, and it sounds so good. The team is really stellar. I mean, saving his blushes, John is one of the best British music conductors internationally. The casting, Yvonne Howard, Catherine Harvey, these are big names. I, of course, from the outset was adamant that we used students in some of the casting in the smaller roles. Because if there's one sort of thing that drives me absolutely mad about the music industry, it's partly the available opportunity for those who have done very well or excellent, but also just people who want to make it in the business, who just want to have the career. And some crumbly old thing will say, well, they haven't got any experience. Well, how do you expect them to get experience if nobody takes a chance? They audition like everybody else. I mean, in the case of the great soloists, the lead characters, Yvonne, Catherine, Priya, Seamus, and Arthur, we'd heard them on the stage. We knew they could do it, and they were offered the role directly. But the younger students had to audition as they would for anything else. They were picked out for their dedication, the sound they made, their attitude. I mean, Christian Leutzu, who has done loads. He was prepared, he took the time to prepare his audition, and now he's a young master's student with professional recording to his name. But because he took the time and initiative to respond to the call out for singers, gave a very mature, and the level of his performance was raised by, it's not as though the greater, more established singers kind of softened what they were doing to not like outshine him. He absolutely rose to their level, I would agree. And he must have been nervous as hell because he was the first person to be recorded. We got into the recording studio, we did a little bit of orchestral, the interlude, I think, so that the orchestra could get into the swing of it. And then it was like, you student, you're, and he then had to, give the performance of his life up to that point.
Yeah, what a fantastic opportunity. I think it's really, really exciting. So I've been sneakily asking you questions from people online whilst we're talking. I've just got one more actually before we move forward, and that is about how important it was to record this work in Scotland with a Scottish orchestra, with Scottish people in the cast. And also, there's quite a lot of Gaelic in the text of the opera. Maybe we could touch a little on how we made it not an appropriation in the way that Margaret Cody Fraser was trying to avoid.
We were very lucky that we already had a relationship with Scottish Opera. We've done our previous recording with them of Stanford's Seamus O'Brien, which was nominated for a Gramophone Opera Award. Fantastic. It was a great project. That opera in particular demands an Irish cast because there's a lot of dialogue. So you can't really have actors, however good, doing an Irish accent for a whole opera. It had to be seamless. And I thought personally that this project was so steeped in Scottish culture that it would be nice to go back and work with Scottish opera again. And also, as far as possible, to use either Scottish singers or singers studying in Scotland, which is how we established a relationship with the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland for the 4 student roles. Arthur is from near Edinburgh. Seamus is also Scottish. Katrina, also Scottish. Catherine Carby's from somewhere called Australia. I don't think that's anywhere near Scotland. But
her character is not Scottish anyway.
No, exactly.
She's a sea creature.
She's a sea creature.
She's swam from Australia.
Yeah.
I see. Yes, that makes sense. I think.
But ultimately, yes, I think it was important and can be important because it is a part of their culture, it's part of their. It was really lovely then to have Marius the dialect on it because she's a folk singer and she knew a lot of these songs in their folk song context.
Yes.
So it's not just a case of pronouncing the words correctly, but I mean, she was able to give us that sense of how that word might otherwise be used, what it's, what the shades of meaning are. And her first language is first language, absolutely. So to have a native speaker who was able to guide us around this, because it's coming in and out of Gaelic. It's mainly in. Lowland Scotland, English Lowland. And then it sort of words in a Gaelic. Sometimes in the songs, sometimes the word drops in here or there. So you have to be quite subtle about how to make that come off. So I found the use of Gaelic made it
Really strong.
and that it's such colour, and it was so natural. Whenever it came in, it was just you almost didn't realise that we'd gone into Gaelic because it's just so obvious. And then I do think that's one of the geniuses
Of the work, that it's just another
little hint that something deep from the past is bubbling to the surface emotionally in the dramatic situation, that there's something has motivated that character to draw something back.
It's beautiful, I think. It's a really nice way of, as you say, weaving together those layers of thousands of years of history or song. B. Hamilton on Facebook has asked a very convenient question, Valerie. How does this fit into Retrospect's plans for the future? I don't know. He's asked the perfect question. This is the 10th anniversary of you, Andy and David founding Retrospect. We've even got cake here for those sitting in the room to celebrate that for today. I wondered whether you might sort of talk a little bit about how the people in the room and on Zoom perhaps help us and our plans are for the future.
Well, I think it's fair to say we've spent the first 10 years really establishing ourselves, trying to see if it works at all. I think we can safely say it does and has. We've got a broad repertoire in our catalogue now, and it's the next stage very much. So we can extend the sort of repertoire we do, develop some of it, do some bigger works, of which more are not. But it's almost as if we've nothing to prove, except everyone always has something to prove. But we've had some cracking experiences. We've met wonderful artists, including John, of course. And what's been amazing is how interested and pleased and excited everyone involved is and has been. And that we are, because that's why we began it. But it's not just the artists, but it's all our subscribers as well, who think, thank goodness somebody is doing this, because it's really worth doing. And the music, we choose it for the music, and the music is always wonderful. So I like to think of it not as forgotten operas, but rare operas, ones we don't get a chance to hear, but should. And it's very exciting that some of the ones that we have recorded, because they are now available, they are now being done elsewhere. Gallant, which we recorded way back, has just been done at the Birmingham Conservatoire. It's about to be done by Pegasus Opera. Bosun's Mate has been done all over the world. Sometimes there might be a single aria that is pulled out and done in some place or other. And it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful, because it's what we wanted, to make this music accessible. So I think if there is a single answer to your question, Ben, it's, that was the beginning, and now we've established themselves, and let's go for it.
I think that's a really nice thing. Talking of which, Joe, I might release you from your duty of monitoring the Zoom. Can you come and squeeze on the sofa? So Joe Pearson is, as well as being a new volunteer with Retrospect Opera, joining us for our 10th year. Joe is an up-and-coming conductor. Since graduating recently from the University of Manchester, he's now gone on to found and artistically direct the City of Stoke-on-Trent Symphony Orchestra, which, despite my accent, I'm very proud to hear, because I hail from just over the border into Cheshire. The orchestra had its debut concert only last week, which included several pieces of British music, a world premiere, and lots of flag waving to celebrate the city's centenary. First of all, I wanted to welcome Joe to the team formally and introduce you. But Joe we have been reflecting collectively on the last 10 years and what we would like to achieve for the next 10 years. And we set Joe the unenviable task to look at our fundraising and how that would work. And Joe, I think you're going to tell us some things. I don't want to steal your thunder.
No, of course. Well, thanks, Ben. Hello, everybody. I think coming in fresh and having a little bit of a fresh glance at thresholds and how we deal with sponsors was quite a good thing at this 10-year juncture for Retrospect. We sort of decided that maybe it was time to have a little rethink. A lot of those thresholds haven't changed, I don't think, for 10 years since Retrospect was established. And I think we probably thought it was a little bit clunky, you know, who's a friend and who, what are these thresholds really? Do they say what they are? So I think we're going to simplify, refine a little bit the way that we deal with our sponsors and our donors who keep us going, without whom we couldn't do anything. So I think we can better reflect their value to us through the things that we also offer in response. This is such an exciting event, I think, and it's probably part of something that we could do more often to get in the same room with people that have supported our project. And I think that's something that we would really like.
Cooler room next time.
With air conditioning would be wonderful. So I think we're going to simply just go to a bronze, silver, gold and platinum with a special category then, because there are some very, very special donors who give a great deal of money, who will be in a sort of special circle category. We haven't really hashed it out fully yet, have we? There's still some decision making to do, and so I don't want to jump the gun with saying what the new thresholds will be. But suffice it to say that if you are a valued donor now, you will be a valued donor then. Yeah,
I think giving you the mean job, really, Joe,
Yes,
in
yeah.
today's presentation. And the one change that you're really interested in, that is looking at rather than project-based donations, we've got some ideas on how to change that.
I think part of our going forward to be a sustainable label, it's vital that we try to encourage as many people as possible to give regularly rather than on a one-off basis. Now, we completely acknowledge that there will be projects that some people are specifically interested in and will be one-time donors for that project. But at the same time, people who would like to give regularly can be part of a group of people who genuinely make us a sustainable enterprise, give us a lot more choices going forward.
Joe, thank you. And then I was going to talk at length about Entente Cordiale and why people should donate generously. You'll have to wind back to the beginning of the video to hear that bit. But when I was talking about Entente Cordiale, I mentioned that we have a second opera in the running that we're preparing for January 2027. Valerie, I wonder if you might tell us a little bit about the other project.
Well, the other project is a Shakespeare opera, Much Ado About Nothing, Stanford. Now, Andy mentioned Seamus O'Brien, which we brought out last year. That was a very Irish opera from an Irish composer, Stanford. But now he wanted to make more of a British opera. So about 5 years later, they saw the arrival of Much Ado About Nothing, where Seamus was what you would call a number opera. There was a song and then some dialogue. Much Ado is through composed. It's very much a grand opera, billed as such, and very, very well received. It got some really, really good reviews, and yet you can't hear it now. It is very, very unusual in that, well, it was the first to use actual Shakespeare text. Not completely, but a very, very high proportion. Now, Shakespeare's words had been used before, but in translation. So this was for real, the proper English, and this was noted at the time. What was interesting is that a few weeks back, there was the inaugural festival of Shakespeare in music, a course in Stratford. Where else would you have it? And in one of the concerts, one of the items was one of the duets from Much Ado, and it got the best applause in that particular concert. Not surprised. It was the staccato duet, wasn't it, Ben?
That's right.
So there's use of leitmotifs, Wagnerian ideas, where you have a person with their own tune, but playing off against others. It's really, really cleverly done. It's a big orchestra, which is going to be fun and games, because I hate to bring up the subject of money again, but big orchestras cost money. So we are working on that. So a lot of the music is very subtle, it's very clever, it's very witty, and it'll be great to hear another Stanford opera. That means we'll have two in our catalogue, and others have been done as well. So what have I not said, Ben? What did
I think you said it.
have I said everything? Yep. I mean, it has been in the notes here. It has been revived back in Wexford in 1964 by Opera Viva in 1985. So really recent, these. Yeah.
Julian Rushton has just said, he saw a production of Much Ado, an amateur one in Morley, West Yorkshire, a few years ago.
Yes,
So
and there was
The Northern Ireland.
there was a semi-stage performance, festival performance in 2019. Wherever it's been done, thank you, Julie. Wherever it's been done, it's always been really enthusiastically acclaimed. So we're really pleased it's going to go ahead. We are hoping to do it so that it comes out in the 175th year of what?
Yes, anniversary.
Anniversary. So it
Yeah.
is an anniversary year, but we're going to have to work quite tightly on that, because if it's to come out in 2027, we've got to record it as basically as soon as possible, but we can't record it until we've raised enough money. So that's our big priority.
Lovely, and that leads us towards the end of afternoon. It's nice and warm in this room. We've just got 5 minutes for questions, both from in the room, although you'll have lots of opportunity to talk with all of us. Joe, have you got any questions on your Zoom that I can't see?
Just one from George Kenway, and he says it's not a very important question, but Kennedy Fraser said that voices from the Outer Hebrides were generally low, whereas voices from Skye were high. Is any of this reflected in the tessitura in the opera?
Well, the Cailleach is very low. I mean, it's hard. I mean, even if I found that sad.
Yes, the 3 vodkas she was having before recording.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry.
I don't think she smoked before. So that narrative voice is it's all from about middle G downwards.
And if I may ask a question of my own to everybody, what is the kind of hope for what people would take away from this recording? You know, do you think it'll change the way people view Kennedy Fraser Bantock? Do you think it will change the way people view opera at the time? Is there anything so big as that, or is it just generally listen to this, genuinely good music?
Well, it's very much a product of its time. I mean, I find it remarkable myself that it came out in 1924, which was also the year of Vaughan Williams's opera Hugh the Drover, which is not real folk song. It's kind of folk song-esque, but it was clearly popular. So I suppose if we're thinking, will it change our view of opera at the time? It serves to increase our understanding of what audiences in 1924 were being given. But ultimately, all I really want people to do is enjoy it and do it and listen to it. It's the ideal piece for conservatoires and small opera companies. And the music is so beautiful, so lush on such restricted forces. The orchestra is so small that it can only help us understand Marjorie Kennedy Fraser so much because the music isn't us. She collected the songs, bravo, thank you very much. But the real mastery is in understanding Bantock's gift as an orchestrator. So anything that serves to, obviously as a scholar, anything that serves to...
You beat me to it.
Anything that serves to improve our understanding of Granville Bantock, then great. Because, I've also worked on a piece of his called The Sphinx, which is an Oscar Wilde song cycle, which is completely different, where he was very, very late to the party, but in the 1940s, then he started exploring atonalism and serialism. But that party was already over by about 1910. So, but this is a beautiful example of his orchestrative abilities in a very small scale.
Thank you.
I'm so surprised this hasn't come up. The Hebridean Symphony. I mean, it uses Kennedy Fraser's collection as well. And how does this differ from? Because the question was, how does he cope with this music? So different from his style. But he's shown, hasn't he?
It is true, yes, absolutely. He did. The Hebridean Symphony is very much based on the same collections of folk songs. In fact, is dedicated to Marjorie Kennedy Fraser. She wanted to dedicate the second volume of her songs to Bantock in return, but he said, no, don't do that. Dedicate it to people more worthy. The Hebridean Symphony I don't know, maybe you can speak about this better than me, but I think the Seal Woman is far more original and interesting, whereas the Hebridean Symphony is Bantock very lushly orchestrating these songs. And in some cases, there are individual sections of that, Caristone and Kishmal's Galley, that he uses in the Hebridean Symphony and then extracted individual movements, probably because he wanted a bit more of this, and it was easier for orchestras and so on to do individual movements of things in concerts than it was to program the whole Hebridean symphony. I would say the Seal Woman is a much more interesting and unique piece of work rather than a series of orchestrated folk tunes.
I asked because I got my copy yesterday and had a chance to listen.
Yeah. Oh, you're in for a treat then.
What a nice place to end, I think. Andy, John, Valerie, thank you. Joe, thank you so much. Could you leave us with one sentence that surprised you, or how you would recommend the Seal Woman? Maybe I'll start with you, Andy.
How would I recommend the Seal? Unique. Just in a word, I think it is unique.
We will have a sentence with one word, yes. John.
It's indescribably beautiful.
I like that.
Beautiful orchestration.
Very good reasons to have a listen. Thank you all very much. We will continue the conversation with some food in the room. Thank you to those of you that have joined us on Zoom. Very much appreciated you taking your time out of your day. The release of The Seal Woman is today. You can find it on our website. And if you want the proceeds to end up with us, please do go to our website to buy it rather than Amazon. As you can imagine, we get rather more from our own website. Do consider what Joe was talking about around monthly giving. We'll send full details of this, along with the details of Smiles, Entente Cordiale and Standard Shakespeare Faithful, Much Ado About Nothing. And one way in particular that you can help us without any money changing hands is by sharing your thoughts, either on social media or by reposting the things that are posted on our social media, which just helps us to spread the word about what we're doing. It's amazing how many people in my own choirs, I go and take the CDs, and they've always got someone that they know that would really love to listen to an unusual opera, that loves opera, but is really excited to hear of our work. So sharing that really will make a difference. Can we thank those of us that are in the room, our three... Thank you very much.